I want to present to you the results of a study that we did in collaboration with Shmuel Neiman Institute about the characteristics of science in the Israeli media. And one might ask why things are falling, but why science in the media? Why is it so important? And when we look, according to surveys from around the world and from Israel, we can see that the mass media is the public's main source of information regarding science and technology. Even Libby told us that earlier. As we can see from a survey done in 2014 in Israel, we can see that internet sites, TV, and then afterwards newspapers and radio are the main sources of information people use daily. So what we want, previous research, as for previous research done about science coverage, according to Schaefer, there were more than 200 studies published about the science coverage. As we can see, some examples from the UK and Germany. But the problem with those, most of those research, is they tend to focus on one medium, such as TV or newspapers, or only a specific research field, such as biology or nanotechnology. And what we do have about Israel is very partial and very outdated information. So we want to know what's going on here. When we came to try to specify our audience, our target audience, we have the public that loves science, that want to hear about science, but they know where to get their science. But there's a whole other part of the public that science is not part of their daily agenda. And what we wanted to know is how much science the general public gets, and that's through the media. So our main research goal was to systematically examine the scope and characteristics of scientific items in the Hebrew-speaking news media in attempt to identify and characterize the scientific information the Israeli public is exposed to and uses it to make its decisions in the day-to-day life. And the first thing we had to answer is what counts as a scientific item. And we had two points of views to choose from. One that says that science is only exact and life science, and the other one that says that everything that has science in front of it is science, like social science and humanities. We decided to go by the definition of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And under the science topic, we have life science, physics, chemistry, etc. And we added archaeology because of the very accurate scientific methods. So what we did is every item that answered our categories for science and a science item was collected through a consecutive 6 months from October 2013 till March 2014, and we cataloged each item by a code book and collected 1,064 items, science items, that went through a quantitative analysis, and then we extracted 20% random items from the database and did some quantitative analysis in order to answer our research questions. So to collect our items, we manually scanned 15 different media sources with a total of 20 programs, and we tried to take them from all around the media. We had from newspapers, tabloids and broadsheet, internet news sites, public and commercial channels in the radio and the television. So we had almost from everywhere. And for each phase of the research, we achieved a pretty high reliability to help us. So what did we find? About the science coverage in the Israeli media, we see that the medium that has the highest amount of science coverage is the printed, the newspapers. And from all the newspapers we have in Israel, the one that has the highest amount of science coverage is the only broadsheet newspaper that we have, which is Haaretz. The next medium is the internet, afterwards the radio, and then the television. And in the radio and television, we see a different picture. Most of the science coverage, well, most of the science items we found in the radio were in the public station. Well, in the television, it was the opposite. We saw more of the science coverage in the commercial channels. And when we look at it in total, it looks like we have quite a lot of science in the media, but when we compare it to the proportion of science from the general amount of items that were published in the same 6 months, we get to the number of about 1.8%, which is not so high. One of the things we think influence the science coverage is the science reporters. We can see it when we compare the number of items from sources that do have science journalists, science reporters, and to the ones that doesn't have. As we can see in the first rubric, if we compare the commercial radio station that doesn't have any science reporter to the public radio station that does have a science reporter, we can see that it's 4 times more items, scientific items, in the public radio station. We can see the same for each other source that we have that do have. That we do have science reporters and those that don't have. As for our scientific research field in the news, we can see that most of the time, actually 61% of our database was items about medicine or life science, because it's the thing that interests everybody the most. Very surprisingly, afterwards, we have with 14.5% physics, which is not a very light digest topic or research field. So when we looked a little bit into it, we saw that the majority, actually 79%, of the items, the physics items, are about space, which is much more sexier. When we're comparing scientific publications of Israeli research to the media publications, we can see a preference of the media to the field of life science, even if it doesn't represent the amount of scientific research publication in contrast to other fields. We can see that engineering, chemistry, physics, and medicine looks quite the same between the scientific publication and the media publications, and in life science we have quite a lot of a difference. When we want to see why scientific research becomes news, we took from the categories of Galtung and Ruge and Harkap and O'Neill about the newsworthiness. And what we can see is that most of the time science will be presented to the public as something surprising, such as surprise, what burns more calories, walking or sex? And the other thing is good news, such as doctors managed to cure a second baby from the HIV virus. To use virus, yeah. And very surprisingly, we expect the media to talk about bad news most of the time. But when it comes to science, it happens only in 5% of the time. From the case we look to, only 5% are science is presented as bad news. If we want to try to characterize how a scientific item in the Israeli media will most likely be, it will most likely be published in the print media in a local news section. It will portray an Israeli or American research and will describe a basic or new research. It will be in the fields of medicine or life science. it will be presented in a positive tone and will be relying on professional source such as a scientist, most of the time a male scientist, or a scientific manuscript. And it will be written by a science journalist if one exists. Now, we said that the majority of items, scientific items, are presented in the printed media. So when we look only just on the newspapers that we have, we see, well, it's an open question. I would say a disturbing picture, but I'm trying not to judge. We see that most of the science information that we get in the papers are, well, the largest amount of it, the science coverage, is in the newspaper that has the least amount of exposure in Israel, as we can see here. It's the only broadsheet that we have, and it has 33% of the frequency of scientific items is about 33%, but the exposure, the rating of the newspaper is quite low. While in the newspaper, one of the tabloids that is given freely in Israel, Israel Hayom, that has the highest exposure to the public, has, well, almost the least amount of scientific items by frequency. That makes us wonder how much science really does get to the general public. And if you want to hear a little bit more about the research and what we found, we had a few more things in the research. You can find it in the report.